virtually. I'm James Van Osdol, and Car Con Carne is brought to you by Alex Ross Art. I'm recording this on the second day of July. The San Diego Comic-Con is just a couple weeks away, July 20th through the 23rd in San Diego, and Alex Ross Art will be there. Whenever Alex Ross Art is at a convention, it's a big deal. It's an area you want to stop by and linger at for a while. In fact, visit on multiple days. Alex Ross Art will be in booth 2415 at the San Diego Comic-Con. Stop by and visit if you're going to be in San Diego, or just visit alexrossart.com.
It's Car Con Carne. Let's meet in the car. It's Car Con Carne. And now here's the star of our show, James Van Osdol.
Dick Biondi was an absolute radio legend. He died last week at the age of 90, and he had a 67-year career that paved the way for generations of broadcasters, including me. He was the first guy in Chicago to play the Beatles on the radio. He was on the ground floor for the likes of Jerry Lee Lewis and Elvis and countless other architects of modern music. He was inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame in 1998. And specific to Chicago, his voice was heard on WLS-AM, WCFL, WMAQ, WBBM FM, WJMK, and WLS-FM. Biondi's passing got me thinking about the importance of radio, especially during his lifetime. Also, the value of community involvement and that thrill of shared pop culture experience. With that, I wanted to invite someone on this episode who could help us learn more about radio legend Dick Biondi. For that, I'm turning to my old WGN colleague, Scott Miller. Scott is the morning host at WJBC, the station billed as the voice of Central Illinois. Scott has known Dick Biondi and his family for decades, and he's the right person to talk to right now. Scott, great to see you.
Good to see you, JVO.
Let's start with the really simple question. Who was Dick Biondi?
A pioneer of radio, a pioneer of rock and roll radio, a pioneer of music. He was the loud guy on the radio, but he was the first loud guy on the radio. He's the guy that played the Beatles for the first time ever in Chicago. He was on stage with Elvis. The Rolling Stones invited him in studio when they recorded Satisfaction in Chicago. They called him personally and said, come to the studio, we're recording a new song. It happened to be Satisfaction. Now, it's not the Satisfaction you hear on the radio because they re-recorded it again in LA. But I would like the opportunity to sit in the studio with the Rolling Stones as they recorded the first ever version of Satisfaction. He's a legend and an icon, and he's the shoulders that we stand on if you are in the medium of broadcasting, whether it be AM or FM or podcast or YouTube or streaming. He broke down walls. He's the one that fought with the program directors first. He's the one that's been fired over 20 times. We all owe him, whether you know him or not.
So you covered a lot of the cool cultural things he was involved with. What set him apart on the air? What made him a special DJ?
Well, he was the first. If you think about some people that you and I are familiar with, Steve Dahl, Steve and Gary, you think about what they did on the radio. Dick Biondi did it first. You think about Jonathan Brandmeier, Kevin Matthews. You think about Eddie and Jobo. You think about Mancow. Biondi did it first. Now, was he shocking and doing crazy things? Not to the level that some of those guys were, but he was doing it for the first time. He laid the groundwork so that they could become what they are. He was the one telling the program director no. He was the one playing more songs and cutting out commercials. He's the one, he at one point told listeners what type of car the program director was driving and to throw rocks at it. They did. The boss called him and said, hey, I'm going to stop by the station, and me and my wife are going out to dinner. We'll be there in about 5 minutes. He went on the radio and said, my boss is pulling up in a, 57 Chevy. Aim at him. People did. He was the first to do it all. But he was also the first to be positive. Sure, he was loud and crazy, but he was never loud, crazy, and negative. You know, you think about the city of Chicago. You're either a Cubs fan or a Sox fan. You either love the Bears or you hate the Bears. Dick Biondi wanted Chicago to win. Anytime a team won, he celebrated them on the radio. There was no one side or the other. He wanted greatness for everybody. And if you ever had a chance to meet him, whether you were an artist or a listener, he treated you like family. He would throw his arm around you, and he would give you the radio station hotline. You know, you worked in radio for many, many years. I used to listen to you. There's a hotline number for the boss to call and yell at you. There's a hotline number for the artists to call to do an interview. Right. Dick Biondi gave that to every human he ever met.
I can't imagine.
If you called Dick Biondi on the hotline, it was normally busy because it was one of his fans that were calling. Why not call the normal listener line that we would publicize on the radio? No, he would give them the hotline. He'd say, call me after 8. And we all would.
That's amazing. All right. So, Scott, reading your social media post, and I mentioned in the introduction that you knew him and worked with him for decades. This quote right here: at 12 years old, he put me on the radio for the first time. And in that moment, I knew what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. Little did I know that was the start of 33 years of friendship. So explain your relationship with Dick, starting with you as a 12-year-old boy.
So mom and dad were divorced, and on the weekends I would go to my dad's house, and during the week I would be at mom's house. Well, we all listened to Oldies 104.3. It was the oldies station in Chicago, and we always listened. Dick Biondi did nights, so if we were in the car, Dick Biondi was on the radio, and we didn't listen to anything else. I didn't listen to Q101 or B96 or WGN. We listened to Oldies 104.3. So I grew up listening to 50s, 60s rock and roll. And then I found out Dick Biondi was going to be doing a live broadcast from the auto show in February at McCormick Place at the Jeep Eagle dealership. Yes, I'll get the plug in. I don't know who did. My mother or father drove me to the auto show. We loved the auto show, but Dick Biondi was never at the auto show. Well, this year he was. So I went to go meet him, and I wanted to get an autograph. There was a big, long line of people. He had plastic bags that said Jeep Eagle, and he was signing them with a black Sharpie. And I get up to the table, and he says, "What's your name?" And I said, "Scott Miller." Well, there was another radio DJ on Oldies 104.3 named Scott Miller. So Dick's eyes lit up, and he goes, "Your name's really Scott Miller?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Get up here. I'll let you do the weather." And at 12 years old, he put me on the radio, on CBS radio, to do the weather in Chicago. And in my prepubescent voice, I said it was 34 at O'Hare, and it was 29 at Midway. And he said, "Eat your heart out, America. Eat your heart out, America." And we took a picture together. And he said, "Where are you from?" I said, "Orland Park." He said, "I'll be down there next weekend doing my show from another used car dealership." He said, "Come and see me." So at 12 years old, I asked my mother or father, "Can you drive me to whatever dealership this is?" They drove me there. I get out of the car. He goes, "Little Scott Miller, get up here. I'll let you do the weather." From 12 until 18 years old, I did the weather for Dick Biondi on Oldies 104.3 every Saturday between 2 and 6 p.m.
That's amazing.
I never knew what I wanted to do. I didn't know if I wanted to be a firefighter, a lawyer, a veterinarian. The moment he put me on the radio, something exploded in my head and said, I can do this and make a living and have fun. And there's been nothing stopping me ever since.
So how did your relationship with Dick evolve through the years? Obviously, you worked together more professionally than doing the weather at the auto show.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when I've been fired a lot in my job, as was Dick Biondi. And to have Dick Biondi on your resume, I was never, ever employed. It was always a friendship. It was always a mentorship. So from 12 to 18, 12 to 16, my parents would drive me. And then from 16 to 18, before I went away to college, I would drive myself from Cary, Illinois to Joliet, Illinois. It didn't matter where they were. I didn't go to the high school football games. I didn't go to prom. I didn't go to homecoming. I was on the radio with Dick Biondi my entire life. So as I got older and he realized that I just wasn't a kid hanging on because he was famous, I wasn't somebody hanging on because that's who my mother grew up listening to when she was 16 years old. I was doing it because I had a passion for it, and he saw something in me. So after I became a young adult, he then would say, "Hey, me and my wife, we're going out to dinner after the remote. Would you like to come with us?" and we'd go out to dinner. And then a year later, he'd say, hey, after this, I'm going to be doing a sock hop. See, that's something not everybody knows. He worked 6 days a week on the radio. For the most of it, it was 7 to midnight, Monday through Friday, and then 2 to 6 on Saturday. Well, after the Saturday show, he would go to local high schools and churches and do sock hops. At Brother Rice High School, it was 2,000 people. I'm talking about not long ago, when I was 18, 19, 20 years old, and he would play oldies music, and people would dance in the gymnasium. So he'd say, hey, will you come to the sock hop with me and keep my wife company? I'm going to be on stage. Will you hang out with my wife? So then I got to know her more. And then I got to know more of his friends. And then Ronnie Rice from the New Colony Six would show up. And then Jim Peterick from the Ides of March would show up. Carl Giammarisi from the Buckinghams would show up. And I got to know these people. So then people started asking if I was Dick Biondi's son, because I was always around. So Dick and his wife said, yeah, that's our kid. And they would just chuckle. Well, that just became a thing. And now they consider me their kid. Without them, I really would have nothing. I don't know what I would do with my life without them. I really have no clue. So 33 years later, Dick retired in 2017. He had a leg ailment, spent time in the hospital a little bit, and we just became even closer because I'd just go hang out at the house and chit chat with him, and we'd talk radio, and he'd make sure the program director wasn't picking on me, and he'd ask about, stations. Hey, how's this station doing? Are there new people there? And he wanted to stay connected and plugged in the entire time, even when he wasn't working.
So much to take away from what you have just said. Starting with mentorship, it's something, it takes someone who is confident and accomplished to want to be a mentor to others, to bring other people up, to lift them up in their industry. And everything I've heard, especially from what you're saying, is that was a role he was perfectly happy in.
Because it happened to him. He started in radio at 8 years old in Endicott, New York. And he was walking downtown, and the radio DJ was on the radio, and it was a big glass window, and Dick was staring at the radio host. And the host said, hey, kid, can you read? And he said, yeah. He said, come in here. And the guy handed him a piece of paper and said, read this commercial live on the radio. And that's what Dick Biondi, it blew up in his head. He said, I'm going to do this for a living. And he went home, and his parents said, we just heard you on the radio. That magic that happens, to know that you're sitting in a room talking into this stupid black microphone, and then on the other end of it are hundreds of thousands of people that have heard every word you just said, and that puts some gravitas to it. That gives you, it blows your ego up. It makes you feel loved. It fills a void. It makes you feel like you're king of the world. And if you can make a career out of it, and he did for 67 years.
Another thing you mentioned is this notion of how he respected the audience. We both in modern days have come up through radio stations where the audience, even with social media, the audience is kind of kept at arm's length. It sounds to me like he was always very cognizant of the fact that without them, he wouldn't exist.
If you talk to anybody that worked with Dick Biondi over the years at any of the radio stations he was at, he would throw his arm around a listener and talk to them one-on-one as if the room was empty. He would do live broadcasts to collect toys for Tots, and he would go live for 36 hours from a mall, nonstop 36 hours broadcasting live. And local fire departments and local unions and local groups would save toys for months and months and months, and then parade through the parking lot of whatever mall he was broadcasting at and bring hundreds of thousands of toys every single year. People would stand in line to come and donate one toy, whatever they could afford. And he would stop and talk to each person. And half of them, he knew where they grew up. He knew the name of their wife or husband. He knew where they went to high school, and he knew where they talked last. He knew it. It was just Linda from Tinley Park. And if she showed up in Algonquin, he'd go, hey, Linda, how are things in Tinley?
Amazing.
You know, he can't do that for everybody, but he did it for more people than you could ever imagine. And if he didn't know you right away, the moment you said, "Oh, I went to New Trier High School," "Oh, yeah, you're married to Rob, right?" And he made you feel special. And I don't know if that happens as much anymore because of the world we live in and social media. You feel because you type on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram and you share your life. Hey, I'm having a great burger here, or, oh, I went on vacation here, or, boy, I got in a bad car accident. We think we're connecting with everybody. We're not. We're sharing our life, but that's not a connection. Dick had one-on-one connections with his listeners.
It's interesting to think back about playing the Beatles on the radio back in the day. There is something to be said, and I mentioned this in my intro, about that shared pop culture experience, something that has diminished through the years because of social media, because of long tail everything. But imagine, if you will, at one point in his career, I read a statistic where he had a 60 share of the audience, which means of the people tuned into radio at that time, 60% of them were listening to him on the air, which meant when he played a song or introduced a new record, everyone heard it and reacted to it at the same time. I mean, it's stunning to think about that. And that's how people, I mean, that was curation in its purest form back then.
I mean, he played the Beatles for the first time. He played Please Please Me for the first time on the radio in Chicago before anybody else. And he got fired 2 weeks later. And he took that record out to LA and he played it one of his first nights on his new gig in LA. And everybody called and said, "Get that crap off the radio, play the Beach Boys."
That's amazing.
I mean, he's a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Radio Hall of Fame. I mean, this isn't just a guy we idolize. This is a pioneer.
Yeah. I mean, truly, I mentioned earlier, here's a guy who was there pretty much at ground zero for Jerry Lee Lewis and Elvis and all these other architects of modern music.
Have you heard the Elvis story?
Was this the T-shirt story?
Yes.
Share it, because I'd love to hear you tell it.
Well, so Dick Biondi would do these sock hops, like I was telling you about. We'd be at Brother Rice High School in the suburbs of Chicago. Well, it was in Youngstown, Ohio, I think, and he was doing these sock hops. And if he knew an artist like Jerry Lee Lewis or Elvis, he would ask them to stop by and make an appearance on stage. So Elvis was on stage with him. I don't know if Dick went to an Elvis concert or if Elvis came to one of his sock hops. I don't know. And Dick said, "Will you sign the front and back of my shirt?" And Elvis said, "For what?" He goes, "I'm going to jump in the audience off the stage, and whoever gets the shirt gets your autograph." And Elvis said, "You're crazy, man." And he signed the shirt, and Dick Biondi jumped into the audience, and the shirt was torn to shreds, and he ended up in the hospital covered in bloody nail scrapes down his chest and back, and nobody ever got an Elvis autograph.
That's amazing. That's so punk rock.
So, like, here's something else that, in the world of radio, when I used to listen to you on the radio, would an artist ever show up, knock on the door, and say, "Here's a song that we're about to release, but nobody's ever heard it before, and you play it first"? Would the artist come to you? Or would you hear from your program director or music director or from the label? Would an artist ever come to you and give you something and say, "Put this on"? A major artist?
Oh, certainly not. And these days, even if that were to happen, there's every likelihood that no one would be at the radio station to receive them.
So one of the Chicago bands that came out in the 60s is the New Colony Six, and the lead singer of that band is Ronnie Rice. Ronnie Rice went to Dick Biondi's house and knocked on the door and said, "Here's our latest record. Will you play it?" And he did. And the New Colony Six became chart toppers in Chicago. He did that for the Buckinghams, for the Ides of March. There would not be a Three Dog Night without Dick Biondi. Dick Biondi took Chuck Negron from Three Dog Night out on a military tour. They would tour military bases in the U.S., and Dick just found musicians that would go and entertain the troops. And that's what got Chuck Negron's voice to a place that he felt confident to go start a band. And Three Dog Night was born shortly thereafter. Like, there is so much impact I don't think people realize.
For sure. And that closeness to the musicians. We hear lots of talent on the air who talks about music, who share stories that they read about musicians, but they're not actually engaging with the musicians in real life. That's a big deal that Biondi had those relationships.
So there was one point, and pardon me if I get the artist wrong, I think it was Jackie Wilson, but don't hold me to it. Dick went on the radio, and I don't know where he was, Chicago, LA, I don't know. And he said, hey, this is the last night of my radio show. I'm being let go because of advertising. We don't have enough advertisers, or there's not enough money to pay for the show. So this has been a blast. Thank you so much. I love you. And I'll talk to you again soon, somewhere up and down the dial. And Dick went to the local tavern or something right after his show. And I believe it was Jackie Wilson was sitting at the end of the bar and said, Biondi, come here. And Dick sat down next to him, and he opened up a briefcase that was full of money and said, take this to your boss and keep your show on the radio.
I can't even imagine that. I can't even.
Right. It's unbelievable. It is unbelievable.
I want a briefcase full of money.
Oh, right. There was a time that Dick came down into the lobby of the radio station, and he had made some comment on the radio. It wasn't worth overreacting to. I don't know what he said, like maybe making fun of the Cubs or the Sox, like nothing major. And there was a guy waiting in the lobby with a gun and pointed it at Dick and had his finger on the trigger. And there is an officer, Officer Vic, was somewhere behind this dude with a gun, walked up and stuck his finger behind the trigger so that the trigger couldn't be pulled. And the guy let go of the gun, and I think he was arrested and blah, 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 blah. I mean, it's the stories, the life he lived is extraordinary.
What advice did he give to you as a broadcaster?
I mean, don't let the program directors get you down. I mean, he got fired over 20 times. I don't know, 23, 26 times. And it was arguments over too many commercials. And he would always ask how I'm doing, how the audience is reacting. Are they giving you any flack, meaning the bosses? And he just always said, are you doing okay? He always wanted to know. And then, I don't know what this is. I was joking with some friends. We were remembering him. And Dick would ask you all the time, are you mad at me? That was his first question. Anytime. Are you mad at me? No, Dick, what would you have done? No, just want to make sure. Okay. He was just loving. He wanted to make sure everything was cool, calm, and collected. And it always was.
So obviously this industry is very different from what it was when he was playing Please Please Me back at the beginning of the 1960s. What do you think his legacy is as radio moves forward in the way it's moving?
His legacy, he's a pioneer of rock and roll radio. Without the legends of his era, you and I wouldn't be doing what we're doing. I don't know if your podcast would exist. I mean, they molded the direction of broadcasting, you know? So his legacy is a rock and roll legend, a Radio Hall of Fame, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Illinois Broadcasters Hall of Fame legend. There'll never be another one like him. There's nobody that can do what he did in the medium of radio broadcasting. He's the pinnacle. He's why we are doing, why you and I are speaking today into microphones.
You mentioning him saying, are you mad at me? Makes me think that perhaps he was self-deprecating, modest given his stature in the universe. What would he say to all this outpouring of tributes and talk about him?
It's very interesting because we would go out to dinner often, and you might not know what Dick Biondi looked like if you weren't a big fan of his. You know, before Facebook, if you didn't go to a sock hop, you didn't know what Dick Biondi looked like. He would call himself a skinny Italian on the radio or a beanpole or something, but you didn't know. But we would go out to dinner, and you would see people around us hear the voice, not look at him. They would just hear the voice, and then their eyes would light up, and they would come up to the table. And if we were out having dinner, and they'd be like, Dick Biondi. Well, the moment you say that name, now everybody's ears perk up. So he would go, and then he would sit, and we would talk with the person. He'd invite them to sit down. We'd talk about what they want to talk about. It would always be, I was there for this, or I saw you do this. And he would talk. He might sign an autograph, or they'd say, oh, I don't want to take up your time. And they'd go back to your table. In his personal life, he was a quiet dude. He was so loud and boisterous on the radio, but in his personal life, he wanted great friends and good company. So he knew he was famous. You had to know. Anywhere we went, he was signing autographs. I mean, but I don't know what he would think about all this. I think he would laugh at it. He would smile and laugh, and he would probably say, I can't believe this is my life. I think he would laugh at it like, how did I end up here? How did I end up being this? Because all he was doing was being himself. There was no rule book. I mean, I don't care what you say. When you were on the alternative rock station in Chicago, you heard somebody else play alternative rock either in Chicago or another city, and it was in the back of your head, and you may have either done something similar to what they did or you did the opposite of what they did. Dick Biondi had nobody to base anything off of. He was just what he thought he should be. And look at him, 90 years old, and every television news outlet in Chicago, and I saw it on Yahoo, I've seen it everywhere. Mm-hmm. People are remembering him. So it's not like he copied or had a rule book. He created the rule book. There was a fun story. He was doing some appearance in LA, and some celebrity, some musical artist of great stature, was supposed to come, and I think it was the Mamas and the Papas. I think Mama Cass was supposed to come and dunk him. He was in a dunk tank. She was supposed to throw a ball and dunk him for charity. They were raising money. And Mama Cass stood him up. Canceled last minute. Somehow Cher of Sonny and Cher found out that Mama Cass stood up Dick Biondi, left her hotel, came over to the appearance and said, I'll dunk that little skinny Italian, and came up and hit the button and dropped him in the water. I mean, that's the level we're talking about here. This isn't just some Chicago radio DJ that we all sort of adored. He's an icon.
Yeah, for sure. So on the social media post I referenced earlier, you said, our last conversation ended with him saying, thank you for being my friend. Let me know if you need anything.
That was every conversation we had. He loved having close friends. He's got a circle of friends that are unbreakable. And I was lucky enough for 33 years to be one of them. And he would always say, let me know if you need anything. If I needed him to make a call to get a radio job, if I needed to interview some band from the 50s, 60s, he had their phone number. I mean, he let me know what you need. Anything you need, let me know. And I never asked him for anything. He's given me my life. He's given me my career. And I would say, thank you, Dick, and let me know if you need anything. And we would just laugh, and that was it. So he was just, he was one of the best.
A remarkable man. All right, Scott Miller, we can hear you in the Bloomington Normal area as part of WJBC, the Scott Miller Show, every weekday morning drive. You had such great memories and stories. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me remember my friend.